I was 15 when I lost him without saying goodbye. No promises, no vows, just an airport and the certainty that love wasn't enough to survive power like his family's. 10 years later, I'm standing across a conference table from him, older, harder, engaged to someone else. And here's the truth we never admitted. Neither of us escaped what we were to each other. This is a love story about first loves that don't wait politely, and the dangerous choices people make when they collide again. If it's your first time here, hit the subscribe button. But if you've been sticking around, thank you for always supporting my channel. Because what happens after they reunite costs more than love ever should. The conference hall in Singapore smelled like ambition and expensive coffee. Esther stood near the refreshment table, reviewing her presentation notes one last time. The International Architecture Summit had become her hunting ground over the years. Contracts signed, reputations solidified, connections made with precision. At 30, she'd learned to navigate these spaces with the same calculated grace she brought to designing buildings that married function with beauty. She heard his voice before she saw him. It wasn't the words, just the cadence, the particular weight he gave to consonants, the accent that had softened but never disappeared. Her body recognized it before her mind caught up, every nerve ending suddenly awake after a decade of careful numbness. Esther turned slowly, coffee cup trembling slightly in her hand. Tae-jin stood 20 feet away, speaking to a cluster of developers in tailored suits. He'd grown into the angles his teenage face had only suggested: sharp jawline, shoulders that filled his custom suit with authority, hair styled with the carelessness only money could buy. But his eyes carried the same intensity she remembered, the same careful observation that had first drawn her to him 15 years ago. Their gazes met across the polished marble floor. Recognition hit like physical impact. His sentence faltered mid-word. The developers around him noticed nothing, continuing their conversation while Tae-jin stood frozen, staring at her like she was a ghost he'd stopped believing in. Esther forced herself to breathe. She'd practiced this moment 1,000 times in her head over the years, imagined herself composed, indifferent, completely over whatever they'd been to each other. But standing here, watching him watch her, she felt 15 again, losing something she couldn't name and couldn't keep. He excused himself from the group and walked toward her with measured steps. Professional, controlled, nothing like the boy who used to run to meet her after school. "Esther?" he said softly, like a question he never expected answered. She set her coffee down before her shaking hands betrayed her. "Tae-jin, I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know you attended these conferences." They stood in the sterile politeness of strangers, years of silence stretching between them like an ocean neither knew how to cross. "You look well," Tae-jin said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar formality. "So do you." She studied his face, searching for remnants of the boy she'd known. "Congratulations on the merger. I read about it in the Financial Times." Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she'd followed his career from whatever distance she'd maintained. "You're with the Accra firm now," he said. Not a question. He'd looked her up too. 3 years. Before that, London and Dubai. "Still running," he said quietly. The words landed like an accusation and a recognition all at once. Esther felt her professional mask slip for just a moment, revealing the wound underneath. "We should catch up properly," Tae-jin continued, recovering quickly. "Are you free for dinner tonight?" Every instinct she'd honed over 10 years of self-preservation screamed at her to decline. But her mouth betrayed her, forming words she'd regret later. "The rooftop restaurant. 8 o'clock. He nodded, something like relief crossing his features before the control returned. "I'll see you then." Esther watched him walk back to the developers, rejoining their conversation as if nothing had shifted. But she knew better. Everything had shifted. The careful architecture of distance she'd built around the memory of him had developed its first crack. 15 years earlier, Seoul International Academy smelled like floor polish and teenage anxiety. 13-year-old Esther sat in the cafeteria, sketching the courtyard visible through the windows, trying to ignore the curious stares that followed her everywhere. Being the only black girl in most spaces wasn't new. Her father's diplomatic career had made her an expert in being seen without being known. She'd learned early to build walls quickly, to protect softness with sharp edges, to leave before anyone could make her feel temporary. A tray slid onto the table across from her. Esther looked up to find a Korean boy about her age studying her sketchbook with genuine interest. He had careful eyes and the kind of stillness that suggested weight carried too young. "That's really good," he said in accented English, pointing to her drawing. "You got the light right. Most people miss how it changes in autumn." She closed the sketchbook reflexively. "Thanks. I'm Taejin." "Esther." He sat down without asking permission, unpacking his lunch with methodical precision. Everything about him suggested careful training. The way he held his chopsticks, the perfectly pressed uniform, the expensive watch that looked wrong on a teenager's wrist. "Why are you sitting alone?" she asked, because subtlety had never been her strength. "Why are you?" he countered. "Fair enough." They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes before Taejin spoke again. "You're the ambassador's daughter." "Deputy ambassador," Esther corrected. "And you're Park Taejin. Your family owns half the electronics in this school." "More than half," he said without arrogance, just stating fact. Something about his honesty disarmed her. Most people at this school performed constantly: wealth, confidence, belonging. Taejin seemed tired of performing. "Do you always eat alone?" Esther asked. "Usually with people my grandmother approves of." He gestured vaguely at the cafeteria's social hierarchy. "But today seemed like a good day to make my own choice." "Rebel," she teased, and was rewarded with the smallest smile. "Revolutionary," he corrected, and Esther laughed despite herself. That's how it started. Not with romance or destiny, but with recognition. Two teenagers who'd learned too early that belonging was conditional, that choices were luxuries, that love wasn't enough to survive the machinery of power. Over the next weeks, their friendship deepened with alarming speed. Taejin started eating lunch with her daily, ignoring the pointed comments from his usual circle. Esther found herself watching for him in hallways, timing her schedule to maximize accidental encounters that felt increasingly deliberate. He was brilliant in mathematics, adequate in literature, terrible at art but desperate to improve. She tutored him through sketching basics, while he helped her navigate Korean social hierarchies she couldn't decode. "Your family seems intense," Esther said one afternoon as they studied in the library. Taejin's expression clouded. "That's diplomatic phrasing. I'm a diplomat's daughter. We're trained in euphemisms." "They're not intense," he said carefully. "They're strategic. Everything is calculated: schools, friends, future marriages. Nothing is left to chance." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He looked at her with sudden vulnerability. "You're the first person here who doesn't want something from me." Esther felt something shift in her chest. "What would I want?" "Access. Connections. The Park family opens doors." He shrugged. "But you don't care about any of that." "Should I?" "Most people do. I'm not most people, Esther said and meant it. Taejin smiled, really smiled, not the careful expression he showed the world. No, you're not. By 14 and 15, friendship had become something more dangerous. Neither named it, but both felt it. The way Taejin's hand would brush hers when passing books. How Esther's pulse quickened when he laughed. The careful distance they maintained in public that disappeared entirely when alone. One evening by the Han River, watching the sunset paint the water gold, Taejin broke their unspoken rule. My father asked about you today, he said quietly. Esther's stomach tightened. What did he ask? Who you are. Why I spend time with you. If your family has useful connections. Taejin threw a stone into the water, watching ripples spread. I told him you're my friend. He said friends are strategic choices, not emotional ones. What do you think? I think he doesn't understand that some things matter more than strategy. Taejin turned to face her, eyes intense in the fading light. You matter more than strategy, Esther. She should have recognized the warning. Should have understood that mattering more made her a threat, not a treasure. But she was 15 and in love, even if neither of them had the courage to say it. You matter to me too, she whispered. They sat close enough to touch but didn't, both understanding that crossing certain lines made them vulnerable in ways neither could afford. The river flowed past, indifferent to teenage promises that wouldn't survive adult power. The embassy event happened 3 weeks later. Esther attended reluctantly, uncomfortable in the formal dress her mother insisted on, navigating conversations with practiced diplomatic grace. She spotted Taejin across the room with his family. Father stern in an expensive suit, mother beautiful and distant, grandmother sharp-eyed and assessing. Their eyes met briefly. Taejin's expression was carefully neutral, but she saw the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes. His grandmother noticed. The older woman turned to follow Taejin's gaze, landing on Esther with laser focus. She studied her for several long seconds, cataloging everything. Esther's dress, her posture, the way she stood slightly apart from the crowd, the way Taejin couldn't quite stop glancing her direction. Esther watched the calculation happen in real time, watched the grandmother lean toward Taejin's father, whisper something that made his jaw tighten. Watched them both look at her like she was a problem requiring solution. She left the event early, suddenly nauseous with recognition. She'd seen this pattern before in diplomatic circles, the way power moved against threats, the precision of consequences delivered without confrontation. Taejin texted her that night. I'm sorry about my grandmother. Esther stared at the message, understanding its weight. Not my grandmother was rude or she doesn't know you. Just I'm sorry. An apology for something that hadn't happened yet but inevitably would. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. They both knew it. 2 days later, Taejin was summoned to the family study. His grandmother, father, and mother sat arranged like a tribunal, faces grave with predetermined conclusions. We need to discuss your friendship with the African girl, his grandmother began without preamble. Taejin forced himself to remain calm. Her name is Esther. Her name is irrelevant. His grandmother's voice carried the weight of finality. Temporary attachments feel permanent when you're young, Taejin. But that's all this is, temporary. She's my friend. Friends are chosen strategically, his father interjected. This girl offers nothing useful to this family. She offers me happiness, Taejin said, hearing the desperation in his own voice. His grandmother's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Happiness is not a strategy for building legacy. You are 16 years old with responsibilities you don't yet understand. This attachment ends now, or we will end it for you. You can't control who I care about. We don't need to control your feelings, she said calmly. Only your circumstances. The conversation ended there. No threats, no ultimatums spelled out explicitly. Just the certainty that power had options loyalty didn't. Taejin texted Esther immediately. Asterisk, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the river? Asterisk. But Esther's phone was turned off. She was sitting in her father's study, watching her mother cry silently while her father explained in his diplomatic voice that they'd been reassigned. Effective immediately. No room for negotiation. Ghana needs me at the main office, her father said, not meeting her eyes. It's a promotion, really. Better opportunities for all of us. This is about Taejin, Esther said flatly. Her father's silence confirmed everything. His family did this. We don't know that for certain, her mother said weakly. But they all knew. Power didn't need to announce itself. It simply moved, rearranging lives like furniture, and people scrambled to adapt or were crushed in the adjustment. Esther felt something inside her go cold and hard. This was the pattern she'd seen her entire life. Belonging was always temporary. Love was always conditional. And leaving was the only constant she could depend on. When do we go? She asked, voice empty. 3 days, her father said. I'm sorry, sweetheart. She went to her room and didn't come out until morning. Taejin found out the next day at school when Esther didn't show up. He texted, called, sent messages through friends. Nothing. Finally, he showed up at her apartment building that evening, only to find movers already packing boxes. Esther's mother answered the door, her face lined with exhaustion and sympathy. She's not seeing anyone right now, Taejin. Please, I just need to talk to her. I know, she said gently. But sometimes love isn't enough, sweetheart. Sometimes the world just decides for you. The door closed. Taejin stood in the hallway, understanding for the first time that his grandmother had been right about one thing. He had no power here. All his family's wealth, all their influence, and he couldn't even get past a closed door to say goodbye. The airport 3 days later felt like a staged tragedy. Esther had agreed to meet him only after he'd begged through her mother, promising he just needed to see her one last time. They found each other near the international gates, both trying desperately to maintain composure while falling apart. I tried to stop them, Taejin said immediately, words tumbling out in panic. I argued with my grandmother, my father, everyone. They wouldn't listen. Esther, I tried. I know, she said quietly. Her face was calm, but her eyes held devastation. I know you tried. This isn't fair. Fair is for people with power. She looked at him with a steadiness that terrified him. We were never going to survive this, Taejin. Not against your family. Not at our age. Don't say that. We'll figure something out. I'll come visit. We'll stay in touch. And then what? Her voice cracked slightly. We maintain a long-distance relationship while your family systematically destroys my father's career? We pretend we're in control when we never were. I love you, Taejin said desperately, saying it out loud for the first time. Esther's eyes filled with tears. I know. I love you too. That's why I'm not going to make you promises I can't keep. What does that mean? It means if we survive this, if we grow up and somehow find each other again, we won't be the same people. She touched his face gently. And that's okay. We'll be whoever we needed to become to survive losing each other. I don't want to lose you. You don't get to choose, she said, and the finality in her voice broke something in him. They stood there, holding each other, crying without shame while airport announcements echoed around them. No promises were made. No vows exchanged. Just the raw acknowledgement that love wasn't enough, that power won, that sometimes goodbye was the only honest word left. When they finally separated, Esther didn't look back. She walked through security with her parents, disappearing into the crowd of travelers, leaving Tae-jin standing alone with the certain knowledge that something essential had been torn from him. He didn't know then that this loss would shape everything that followed. Didn't know that he'd spend the next decade trying to become powerful enough that no one could ever take anything from him again. Didn't know that power wouldn't fill the space she'd left behind. The next 10 years passed in a montage of deliberate forgetting. Esther threw herself into architecture school in London, then Dubai, then Accra. She dated men who felt safe, kind, interested, but never quite able to reach the places she'd sealed off. She learned to leave relationships before they could leave her, perfecting the art of goodbye until it felt like a skill instead of a wound. Seoul became a story she told at parties when people asked about her diplomatic childhood. Just another city in a life of movement. Nothing special. Nothing that still hurt. She built buildings that connected spaces without pretending they were the same. That was her philosophy. Honor difference, create bridges, but never force belonging. Her designs won awards. Her firm's reputation grew. She became someone people wanted to hire, to work with, to know. But late at night, alone in hotel rooms across continents, she sometimes found herself touching the space on her left hand where a promise might have lived. Found herself wondering if he'd become who his family wanted. If he'd forgotten her completely. If the boy who'd loved her by the Han River still existed somewhere inside the man he'd become. She never looked him up. That felt too much like hope, and hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Tae-jin, meanwhile, embraced the machinery of power with ruthless efficiency. If his family wanted strategic choices, he'd give them perfection. He became fluent in 5 languages, earned degrees from Harvard and Oxford, returned to Seoul to take his predetermined place in the family empire. He married at 25, a merger disguised as romance, exactly as his grandmother had planned. The marriage lasted 18 months before both parties acknowledged its emptiness and divorced with the same cold precision that had united them. No scandal, no emotion, just a contractual adjustment that satisfied everyone's strategic needs. His family didn't punish him for the divorce. They simply arranged another engagement, this time with better contracts and clearer expectations. Tae-jin said yes because saying no required caring about something beyond power, and he'd successfully killed that capacity. Or so he told himself. He never looked Esther up either. That felt too much like admitting he'd failed to forget her, and failure was another luxury he couldn't afford. Both of them constructed careful lives around the absence the other had left. Both succeeded brilliantly at everything except filling that space. Until Singapore. The rooftop restaurant overlooked the city's financial district, all glass and steel reflecting sunset colors that felt synthetic in their perfection. Esther arrived early, choosing a table near the edge where she could watch the streets below and maintain the illusion of escape routes. Tae-jin appeared exactly at 8. Dressed in clothes that cost more than some people's monthly rent, but wearing them like armor instead of adornment. He sat across from her without the usual small talk, both of them too raw for performance. "I didn't expect to see you again," he said simply. "I didn't expect to see you ever," Esther replied with equal honesty. "How long has it been?" 10 years. 10 years. For months. She caught herself. Approximately. Something flickered across his expression. Recognition that she'd counted too. You look different, Taejin said, studying her with the same intensity she remembered. More guarded. You look exactly like what your family wanted you to become. It should have been an insult, but he took it as accurate observation. I did become what they wanted. It was easier than fighting. And your divorce? She'd read about it in business journals, not gossip magazines. Was that what they wanted too? That was a strategic adjustment. His voice carried no emotion. We both knew it wasn't sustainable. Sustainable, Esther repeated. That's a word for infrastructure, not marriage. Marriage is infrastructure when you come from families like mine. They ordered food neither would eat, both buying time to navigate conversation that felt like crossing a minefield blindfolded. I followed your career, Taejin admitted. The cultural center in Dubai was extraordinary. You did exactly what you said you'd do. Created spaces where different worlds could meet without pretending to be the same. Esther felt exposed by his attention, by the fact that he'd tracked her success with the same precision she'd tracked his. And you became the youngest executive board member in your company's history. Your grandmother must be proud. She died 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Don't be. He looked out at the city lights. She orchestrated everything until the end, including this engagement. Esther's hand tightened around her water glass. You're engaged. For 6 months now. We're finalizing merger details before the wedding. Romantic. It's not supposed to be romantic. Taejin's eyes met hers with sudden intensity. It's supposed to be strategic, stable, exactly what's expected. Everything I learned to want after you left. After your family forced me to leave, Esther corrected. Yes. No argument, no defense. Just acknowledgement. After they forced you to leave and taught me that love was a liability I couldn't afford. The honesty cut deeper than accusations would have. Esther forced herself to breathe, to maintain the composure she'd perfected over a decade of practicing indifference. Why did you want to have dinner, Taejin? Because seeing you today felt like remembering I used to be someone else. He leaned forward slightly. Someone who believed love mattered more than strategy. Someone who thought happiness was worth fighting for. And now I don't know if that person still exists, or if he's just a story I tell myself about who I was before I learned better. Esther felt something crack in her carefully maintained distance. You want me to tell you that person still exists? That 15-year-old boy who gave up everything because his family moved chess pieces better than we played. I want you to tell me if you still think about that person. If any part of you still feels what we felt before we learned it wasn't enough. The question hung between them like a dare. Esther could lie. Should lie. Walk away from whatever this was before it became something that could hurt her again. Instead, she told him the truth. Every relationship I've had for 10 years has failed because I compare every man to a 16-year-old boy by a river. Her voice shook slightly. I run from every city before I can belong there because Seoul taught me that belonging makes you vulnerable. I design buildings that connect without merging because I can't figure out how to be close to anyone without losing myself. Taejin's careful control slipped, revealing raw emotion underneath. You're the reason I can't feel anything for anyone. You're the reason every relationship feels like performance. You're the reason I agreed to another strategic marriage, because at least that's honest about being empty. They stared at each other across the table, years of careful distance evaporating in the face of admissions neither had intended to make. This is dangerous, Esther said quietly. I know. We can't go back to who we were. I know that too. Then what are we doing here, Taejin? He reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed hers with devastating gentleness. I don't know, he admitted. But for the first time in 10 years, I feel like I'm not performing. Like I'm actually here instead of somewhere safe and dead inside. Esther should have pulled her hand back. Should have recognized this as the beginning of another loss. Another wound that would take years to cauterize. But she didn't. She let his hand cover hers. Let herself feel the dangerous warmth of connection she'd spent a decade avoiding. I'm leaving Singapore in 3 days, she said. I'm engaged to someone else. This can't go anywhere. I know. They sat there in mutual acknowledgement that they were about to make a terrible decision, that neither could seem to stop themselves, that 10 years of carefully constructed defenses were crumbling in real time. I'm staying at the Marina Bay, Esther said quietly. Taejin's eyes darkened with understanding. Room number 1847. He pulled his hand back, both of them understanding what they just agreed to without saying it explicitly. One night to satisfy 10 years of wondering. One mistake to prove they could survive it. One goodbye to replace the one they never got. Tomorrow, Taejin said. Not tonight. Tonight we both go back to our separate hotels and decide if we're really doing this. And if we decide yes, then tomorrow we stop pretending we're over each other. He stood, placing enough money on the table to cover meals neither had touched. And we deal with the consequences after. He left without looking back, and Esther sat alone watching the city lights blur as her eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for a decade. This was how it started again. Not with promises or declarations, but with the honest acknowledgement that some loves didn't die. They just waited for their moment to destroy you all over again. Esther didn't sleep that night. She lay in her hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, having the same argument with herself on repeat. This was stupid, dangerous, a guaranteed path to pain she'd worked too hard to avoid. But God, she wanted it, wanted him, wanted one night where she didn't have to pretend the last 10 years had successfully killed something that clearly refused to die. At dawn, she made her decision. She texted him a single word, yes. His response came immediately, like he'd been awake too. 6 p.m. The day passed in a blur of conference sessions Esther attended without hearing. She went through the motions, nodded at presentations, exchanged business cards, maintained professional conversations, while every nerve in her body counted down hours. At 5, she returned to her hotel and showered with deliberate slowness, trying to calm racing thoughts that refused to cooperate. She dressed carefully in clothes that felt like armor and seduction simultaneously. She stared at herself in the mirror and saw all the ways she'd changed. The guarded eyes, the practiced composure, the defensive posture that had become her default. She wondered if he'd see those changes or remember who she'd been before loss taught her to protect herself. The knock came at exactly 6 o'clock. Esther opened the door to find Taejin standing in the hallway, still wearing his conference suit but looking significantly less composed than he had the night before. His hair was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, his expression carrying vulnerability she hadn't seen since they were teenagers. I almost didn't come, he said without preamble. I almost didn't answer the door. We could still stop this. Go back to our separate lives and pretend yesterday never happened. Esther stepped back, letting the door swing wider. Do you want to stop? Taejin walked in slowly, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. No. God help me, no. They stood 3 feet apart in the hotel room's artificial light, both paralyzed by the magnitude of what crossing this distance would mean. I'm engaged, Taejin said again, like a confession, to a woman who doesn't deserve this betrayal. And I've spent 10 years learning not to need anyone. Esther's voice shook slightly. This will destroy that progress. We're terrible people for doing this. I know. He moved first, closing the distance between them in 2 strides, hands framing her face with the kind of tenderness that felt like coming home after a decade of homelessness. I never stopped, Taejin whispered against her mouth. Not for a single day. I never stopped loving you, Esther. She kissed him instead of answering, because words felt insufficient for something this big and broken and desperate. They collided like they were trying to make up for 10 years in a single night. It was urgent and messy and nothing like the careful first explorations they'd never quite gotten to as teenagers. This was adult want mixed with adolescent longing, present desire tangled with past grief. Afterward, they lay tangled in hotel sheets, the city lights casting patterns across skin, marked with evidence of connection they couldn't deny. What happens now? Esther asked quietly. Taejin's fingers traced absent patterns on her shoulder. I don't know. I should end my engagement. That's the honest thing to do. Should. But will you? He was quiet for a long time. My entire family has built plans around this marriage. Business mergers, strategic alliances, political connections. Ending it would destabilize everything. Including you, Esther said, not quite a question. Including me, he admitted. I've built my entire identity around being exactly what they needed. Without that, I don't know who I am. She felt something cold settle in her chest. So this was just one night. Nostalgia sex to prove we're over each other. That's not fair. No. She sat up, pulling the sheet around herself like armor. Then tell me what this is, Taejin. Because from here, it looks like you wanting the comfort of connection without any of the cost. It's more complicated than that. It always is when people choose the safe option. Esther's voice turned hard. You're going to go back to your fiancé, to your strategic marriage, to the life your family built for you. And I'm going to go back to running from anything that might make me vulnerable. Nothing changes. Something changed, he said desperately, reaching for her. Tonight changed something. Did it? She pulled away. Or did it just prove what I've always known? That love isn't enough. That power wins. That we were kids playing at something we didn't understand and now we're adults who understand too much. Taejin flinched like she'd struck him. You think I want this? You think I want to choose obligation over you? I think you will. Because that's who you became after I left. Someone who chooses stability over risk, strategy over feeling, safety over love. And you became someone who leaves before she can be left, he shot back. Someone who runs from every city, every relationship, every chance at connection because soul taught you that belonging is dangerous. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both recognizing the truth in accusations that cut too close. We're terrible for each other, Esther said finally. We always were, Taejin agreed. Your family knew it. Mine definitely knew it. We were the only ones stupid enough to think love mattered more than reality. And now we know better. Now we know better, he echoed, but his voice carried no conviction. He got dressed slowly, both of them watching the moment end in real time. At the door, he turned back one more time. If I asked you to wait, don't. Esther cut him off. Don't ask me to wait for you to find courage. Don't ask me to be your secret. Don't ask me to be the person you keep while maintaining the life that destroyed us the first time. Then what are you asking me? I'm asking you to choose. Actually choose. Not strategically, not carefully, not in ways that protect everyone except us. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Choose me publicly, completely, with all the mess and cost and uncertainty that comes with it. Or don't. But don't ask me to settle for less than everything just because you're too afraid to lose control. That's not fair, he said again, but weaker this time. No, Esther agreed. It's not. But neither was what happened to us 15 years ago. Life isn't fair, Taejin. But at least I'm asking for something honest. He stood there, hand on the doorknob, clearly torn. She could see the battle playing out. Duty against desire, fear against love, the person his family made him against whoever he might have been. I need time, he finally said. Then take it. But take it away from me. She turned away, unable to watch him leave again. Because I won't be your secret, and I won't be your backup plan. I'm worth more than that. We're worth more than that. The door closed quietly behind him. Esther stood alone in the hotel room, surrounded by evidence of connection that hadn't solved anything. Feeling like 15 again. Losing him, knowing she couldn't keep him, hating that love still wasn't enough. She booked a flight home for the next morning. Running again. But at least this time, she was running with clarity instead of confusion. Some loves didn't survive waiting. They survived choosing, or they didn't survive at all. 3 weeks later, Esther was back in Accra, buried in work, pretending Singapore hadn't happened. She'd perfected the art of compartmentalization, put the night with Taejin in a sealed box in her mind and refused to open it during business hours. It only fell apart at night. Her business partner Amma had stopped asking what was wrong after the 5th deflection. But the concern in her eyes remained constant. You're going to burn out, Amma said one afternoon, watching Esther review the same building plans for the 3rd time without seeing them. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. Amma closed the portfolio gently. Whatever happened in Singapore is eating you alive. Talk to me. I saw him, Esther heard herself say. Taejin, the boy from Seoul I told you about. Oh, honey. We slept together. I told him to choose me or lose me. He chose to take time. So I left. The words came out clinical, empty of the emotion roiling underneath. End of story. That's not the end, Amma said gently. That's just the most recent chapter. Before Esther could respond, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She ignored it. It rang again immediately. Answer it, Amma said. Could be a client. Esther picked up reluctantly. Hello, Ms. Mensa. An unfamiliar woman's voice, professional and cool. This is Park Min-ji. Esther's blood went cold. Taejin's fiancé. Yes, I'm calling to invite you to dinner. Tonight, if you're available. I don't think that's appropriate. I disagree. Min-ji's voice carried steel underneath the politeness. You slept with my fiancé 3 weeks ago. I think dinner is the least we owe each other. Esther's stomach dropped. How did you? Taejin told me. 2 days ago. He's trying very hard to be honorable about his dishonesty, which is almost charming in its inadequacy. A pause. I'm at the Kempinski Hotel, the restaurant. 7 o'clock. I promise I won't make a scene. The line went dead. Amma stared at her. What just happened? His fiancé knows. Esther set the phone down with shaking hands. She wants to meet me. Are you going to go? I have to. Esther stood, already mentally cataloging what this conversation might cost. She flew to Accra. That's not a casual decision. Be careful, Amma warned. Women scorned and all that. But when Esther arrived at the restaurant that evening, Park Min-ji didn't look scorned. She looked tired, elegant, and far more composed than anyone had a right to be given the circumstances. She was beautiful in the way powerful Korean women often were. Precise features, expensive clothes worn with careless grace, an aura of control that money and breeding cultivated across generations. She stood as Esther approached, extending her hand with corporate formality. "Thank you for coming," Min-ji said. "Please sit." Esther sat, feeling wrong-footed by the civility. She'd expected anger, accusations, maybe threats. Not this calm assessment. "I'm not here to fight you," Min-ji said, apparently reading her confusion. "I'm here because I need you to understand something about the man we're apparently both involved with." "I'm not involved with him," Esther said reflexively. "You slept with him 3 weeks ago." He came home and confessed immediately, which tells me you mean significantly more than a one-night mistake. Min-ji sipped her wine with studied casualness. "So let's not insult each other with lies. You love him. He loves you. That's obvious. If this is where you tell me to stay away, this is where I tell you he's going to choose you." Min-ji's eyes met hers steadily. "Not because you're better than me. Not because what you have is special. But because you represent the one time in his life he wasn't strategic, wasn't controlled, wasn't exactly what his family needed him to be." Esther felt like she was navigating conversation in a foreign language. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm giving you a warning his family never will." Min-ji leaned forward slightly. "Taejin is addicted to the idea of you. The girl who got away. The love that didn't work out because of external forces. He's built an entire mythology around what you represent. Freedom, authenticity, emotion. That's not." "Let me finish." Min-ji's voice turned sharp. "The reality is that Taejin is a deeply controlled man who occasionally needs to feel out of control. You provide that. But the moment you stop being the impossible dream and start being everyday reality, grocery shopping, arguing about stupid things, navigating whose family to visit for holidays, he'll realize you're just as complicated and difficult as anyone else. You don't know me." "No. But I know him." Min-ji's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I've been engaged to him for 6 months. I've watched him perform perfect partnership while feeling nothing. The only time I've seen him feel anything real was when he came home from Singapore, devastated because he'd betrayed me but also clearly alive in ways he hasn't been in years." Esther felt sick. "Why are you really here?" "Because he's going to break our engagement tomorrow." Min-ji's voice carried resignation, not grief. "He's going to choose you, disrupt both families' plans, probably damage his position in the company, and pursue this relationship like it's the answer to every question he spent 10 years avoiding. And you're warning me it won't work. I'm warning you that relationships built on mythology rarely survive reality." Min-ji finished her wine. "But I'm also here to tell you that if you're going to do this, if you're going to let him blow up his life for you, you owe him honesty. Not the fantasy version where you're the lost love who fixes everything. The real version, with all your damage and fear and tendency to run." "I told him to choose me or lose me," Esther said quietly. "And he's choosing you. But what happens after that choice? When the drama fades and you're just two people trying to figure out if teenage love translates to adult partnership." Min-ji stood, gathering her bag with efficient grace. "That's what you need to decide, Ms. Mensah. Not whether you love him, but whether you're willing to stay long enough to build something real instead of running when it gets difficult. She left before Esther could respond, leaving her alone with questions that felt like accusations. Was Minji right? Was Esther in love with the mythology too? The boy who'd loved her before the world taught them both to be careful? Was she capable of staying when things got hard? Or would she run the first time reality disappointed her? She didn't have answers. But she knew Minji had flown across continents to deliver a warning that felt more like a gift. The chance to choose deliberately instead of letting emotion make decisions reason should have been part of. Her phone buzzed. Taejin. I broke the engagement. I'm choosing you. Can we talk? Esther stared at the message, feeling the weight of what he'd just done. The life he'd disrupted, the family anger he'd invited, the stability he'd sacrificed. She typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on. Not yet. I need time to think. His response was immediate. About what? Esther, I chose you. You chose the idea of me, she wrote back. Now I need to figure out if I'm willing to become the reality. She turned her phone off before he could respond. Some conversations required clarity she didn't have yet, and she'd learned the hard way that making decisions from places of panic or pressure guaranteed regret. For days later, Esther's phone rang with a call from an unknown Korean number. She almost didn't answer, still not ready to talk to Taejin. But something made her pick up. Ms. Mensah, an older woman's voice, accented and formal. This is Park Soyeon, Taejin's mother. Esther's heart rate spiked. Mrs. Park, I'm calling to invite you to Seoul. There are matters we need to discuss regarding my son's recent decisions. With respect, I don't think. My mother-in-law orchestrated your family's departure 15 years ago. Soyeon's voice carried something that might have been regret. She died believing she'd protected this family. I'd like the opportunity to determine if she was right or if we made a mistake that cost my son his happiness. Why would you want that? Because Taejin hasn't smiled genuinely in 10 years, Ms. Mensah. And according to my assistant, who saw footage from the Singapore conference, he smiled at you like a boy who'd forgotten what joy felt like. A pause. I don't know if you're right for my son, but I'd like to meet the woman worth destroying a carefully planned engagement over. He destroyed his engagement, Esther corrected. I didn't ask him to. No, you asked him to choose. That's far more dangerous than asking for destruction. Soyeon's voice carried something almost like approval. Will you come to Seoul? I'll cover all expenses. 1 week. No obligations beyond conversation. Esther should have said no. Should have recognized this as manipulation wrapped in civility. But Minji's words echoed in her head. You owe him honesty. Not fantasy. Reality. And reality meant facing the family that had torn them apart 15 years ago. Meant seeing if love could survive not just reunion but the everyday brutality of building something in the wreckage of mythologies that couldn't hold. 1 week, Esther agreed. But I'm paying my own way. I won't owe your family anything. As you wish. Soyeon sounded almost amused. I'll have my assistant send details. Welcome back to Seoul, Ms. Mensah. It's been too long. The line disconnected, leaving Esther wondering what she just agreed to and whether she was brave or stupid for walking back into the machinery that had crushed them before. Amma found her staring at her phone an hour later. You're going back to Seoul, Amma said. Not a question. His mother invited me. That's either a trap or a genuine olive branch. Probably both, Esther admitted. But I can't ask him to choose me without being willing to face what that choice actually costs. Minji was right about that much. Minji. His ex-fiancé flew here to warn me about mythology versus reality. Esther laughed without humor. I'm apparently in love with the idea of him as much as he's in love with the idea of me. We're both performing some tragedy we didn't get to finish as teenagers. Or, Amma suggested gently, you're two people who loved each other before you learned to be afraid of love. And now you're trying to figure out if that foundation survives when you're both damaged and difficult. That sounds harder than mythology. It is, but it's also the only way to build something that lasts. Esther booked her flight that night, returned to Seoul for the first time in a decade. Not running away but running towards something she couldn't name yet. Fear and hope mixed together until she couldn't distinguish between them. Taejin didn't know she was coming. She'd asked his mother to keep it quiet, wanting the element of control that surprise provided. Childish, maybe, but necessary for maintaining some sense of agency in a situation that felt designed to strip it away. The flight gave her 13 hours to think, to remember, to rehearse conversations that wouldn't happen the way she imagined. Seoul looked different through the taxi window. More glass, more steel, more evidence of money moving through the city like water reshaping landscape. But Han River still looked the same, flowing past buildings that rose like monuments to ambition and loss. The Park family house was in Gangnam, behind walls that suggested money so old it didn't need to announce itself. Security let her through after verification, and a woman in her 50s, Soyeon presumably, met her at the door. She looked like Taejin would in 20 years if stress didn't kill the softness first. Same eyes, same careful posture, same sense of carrying weight invisible to observers. Ms. Mensah, thank you for coming. Soyeon's English was impeccable, her handshake firm but not aggressive. I imagine you have questions. Several. Would you like tea first? Or should we dive directly into difficult conversation? Despite herself, Esther almost smiled. Difficult conversation. I've never been good at small talk. Neither is my son. Soyeon led her to a sitting room that managed to feel both expensively decorated and oddly impersonal. He gets that from his father, who gets it from his mother, who got it from a long line of people too important to waste time on pleasantries. Is that what I am? A waste of time. You're a disruption, Soyeon corrected. Pouring tea neither of them would drink. Whether that's productive or destructive remains to be determined. Your mother-in-law thought it was destructive. My mother-in-law thought anything she couldn't control was destructive. Soyeon's expression didn't change, but something in her voice carried old wounds. She arranged my marriage too, you know, to a man I didn't love. We learned to be partners. We never learned to be happy. I'm sorry. Don't be. We weren't unhappy. Just empty in ways we didn't discuss. She met Esther's eyes directly. I don't want that for Taejin. But I also don't want him to destroy everything for a fantasy that can't survive reality. That's what Minji said. Minji is a smart woman who deserved better than a man in love with someone else. Soyeon's voice carried genuine regret. But she was also right that my son has built mythology around you. The question is whether you're willing to become human instead. Meaning stay. Don't run when things get difficult. Don't leave the first time you fight or the first time he disappoints you or the first time you realize love isn't enough to erase damage. Soyeon leaned forward slightly. My mother-in-law tore you apart because she could. Because you were children with no power. You're adults now. The only thing that can separate you is your own fear. His family could still. We have no power over him anymore. Soyeon cut her off. He's independently wealthy through work he's done outside family business. He has connections, reputation, skills. We can disapprove, but we can't force anything. A pause. The only prison he's in now is the one he built himself. And the only person who can free him from that is him. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to know if you're brave enough to stay when he can't be everything you've mythologized to. Soyeon's voice turned gentle. You've built fantasy around the boy who loved you before the world intervened. But that boy is gone, Ms. Mensah. There's only the man he became after losing you. Someone careful and controlled and occasionally cruel in ways survival required. I know that. Do you? Because loving the damaged reality of someone is far different than loving the memory of who they were. Soyeon stood, clearly ending the conversation on her terms. Taejin doesn't know you're here. I'll tell him tonight. What you do with that information is your choice. She left Esther alone in the sitting room, surrounded by wealth that felt like suffocation and silence that demanded answers she didn't have. Was she brave enough to stay? To build something real instead of running when reality disappointed? To love Taejin not as the boy he'd been but as the man he'd become, with all the damage and difficulty that entailed? She didn't know. But she knew she owed them both the honesty of trying to find out. Taejin arrived at the family house at 11 that night, summoned by his mother with no explanation. He walked in expecting crisis, business emergency, family scandal, something requiring his particular skills at damage control. Instead, he found Esther sitting in the formal living room, wearing jeans and exhaustion like armor. He stopped in the doorway, completely still, looking at her like she might disappear if he moved. You're here, he finally said. Your mother invited me. Without telling me. I asked her not to. Esther stood slowly. I needed to come here without you preparing. Without knowing what you'd say or how you'd perform. I'm not performing right now, Taejin said quietly. I'm just shocked. They stood 15 feet apart, the distance feeling both too close and impossibly far. You broke your engagement, Esther said. You told me to choose. I told you to choose honestly, not strategically, not carefully. She took a step closer. So I need to know, did you choose me because you love me? Or because I represent something you think you lost? Taejin flinched. Who told you that? Minji, your mother. Both of them, in different ways, warned me that we might be in love with mythologies instead of reality. And what do you think? I think they're probably right. Esther's voice shook slightly. I think I've spent 10 years in love with a 16-year-old boy who doesn't exist anymore. And I think you've spent 10 years in love with a 15-year-old girl who grew into someone complicated and difficult and definitely not the fantasy you've been carrying. So this is where you leave, Taejin said flatly. Where you decide it's too hard and run before you can get hurt. No. She took another step closer. This is where I ask if you're willing to meet me in reality instead of mythology. If you're willing to know the actual person I became. Someone who runs from commitment, who doesn't believe in permanence, who will probably hurt you because I don't know how to stay when things get difficult. And in return? In return, I'll try to know the actual person you became. Someone who uses control as protection, who struggles with emotion, who learned to survive by being exactly what everyone needed instead of who you wanted to be. She was close enough to touch him now. We can build mythology or we can build reality. But we can't do both. Taejin reached out slowly, taking her hand with devastating gentleness. What does reality look like? Messy, uncertain, probably painful. Esther threaded her fingers through his. But honest. No performing, No fantasy. Just two damaged people trying to figure out if love can survive when it's not tragic or impossible anymore. I don't know if I know how to do that. Neither do I. She squeezed his hand. But I'm willing to learn if you are. I broke my engagement for you, Tae-jin said. Disrupted family plans, damaged business relationships, made myself look unstable and emotional. Everyone thinks I've lost my mind. Have you? Probably. He smiled for the first time. Tired and genuine and nothing like the careful expressions she remembered from Singapore. But I'd rather lose my mind with you than maintain perfect control without you. That's the mythology talking. Maybe. He pulled her closer. Or maybe it's just the truth. I don't know anymore, Esther. I don't know if what I feel is real or fantasy. But I know that every relationship I've tried to build with someone else has felt like performance. And you're the only person who makes me feel like I'm actually present in my own life. That's not enough for forever. No, he agreed. But it might be enough for right now. For today. For trying to figure out what reality looks like without running from it. She studied his face, older, harder, marked by years of careful control and recent devastation. This wasn't the boy she'd loved by the river. This was someone more complicated, more damaged, more real. Okay, she said finally. Let's try reality. But we need rules. Rules. We don't make promises we can't keep. We don't lie to protect each other's feelings. We don't stay if it stops being honest. She met his eyes steadily. And we both have to be willing to admit if this doesn't work. If the mythology was all we had. And if it's not? Tae-jin asked. If we're more than mythology? Then we build something real. Slowly. Without guarantees. She touched his face gently. But we start by admitting we don't know if this works yet. We just know we have to try. He kissed her then. Not desperate like Singapore, but deliberate, choosing her with full awareness of what that choice cost and what it couldn't promise. When they pulled apart, his mother was standing in the doorway, watching with an expression Esther couldn't quite read. I'm glad you came, Soyeon said simply. And I hope you both understand what you're attempting. We do, Esther replied. Good. Soyeon moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, my mother-in-law was wrong about many things. But she was right that love alone isn't enough. You'll need honesty, patience, and willingness to stay when mythology shatters. She looked at them both. Do you have that? I don't know, Esther admitted, but I'm willing to find out. Soyeon nodded once, satisfied, and left them alone. Tae-jin turned back to Esther, still holding her hand like he was afraid she'd disappear. What happens now? Now we figure out if we're brave enough to be disappointing. She smiled slightly. Together. I can do disappointing, he said. I've had lots of practice. Me too. They stood there in the house that had once represented everything keeping them apart, choosing each other with full knowledge that choice didn't guarantee happiness. Just the possibility of something real. The apartment in Hong Kong was neutral territory. Neither Seoul nor Accra. Neither his city nor hers. They'd chosen it deliberately, building something that belonged to both of them instead of trying to fit into each other's established lives. Esther stood on the balcony, watching the city pulse with light and motion below. Behind her, she heard Tae-jin moving through the apartment, the familiar sounds of his nightly routine. Kettle boiling, laptop closing, the soft shuffle of papers being organized for tomorrow. They'd fought 3 times this week. About work boundaries, about whose family to visit for the holidays, about Esther's tendency to book flights when conversations got difficult. Real fights, Not the kind they could blame on external forces or mythology. And they'd stayed, both of them, through disappointment and frustration and the brutal reality of learning each other's damage patterns. Taejin joined her on the balcony, handing her tea without asking if she wanted it. He knew she wanted it. 2 years of reality had taught him her patterns the way she'd learned his. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said quietly. "I was controlling the conversation instead of having it with you. I'm sorry I threatened to book a flight to Accra instead of fighting properly." "You did book a flight to Accra," he corrected. "But I cancelled it." She turned to face him. "That's growth, right?" He smiled, the genuine one that appeared more often now. "That's definitely growth." They stood close, comfortable in ways mythology never allowed. Boring in the best possible way. Fighting about stupid things and learning to repair instead of run. Building reality one disappointing, beautiful, ordinary day at a time. "Do you regret it?" Esther asked suddenly. "Breaking your engagement, disrupting your life, choosing this instead of certainty?" Taejin considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. "Sometimes, when we fight about whose turn it is to do dishes, or when you shut down instead of talking, or when I try to control outcomes because vulnerability feels unbearable. That's honest. You asked for honest." He pulled her closer. "But I don't regret choosing you. I regret that choosing you meant losing certainty. But I'd make the same choice again. Every time. Even when I'm disappointing? Especially when you're disappointing. Because disappointing means real." He kissed her forehead. "Mythology doesn't fight about dishes. Mythology doesn't make you tea without asking first either." "No," he agreed. "Mythology is grand gestures and tragic separation. Reality is tea and arguments and learning to stay when it's boring." "Are you bored?" she challenged. "Terrified," he admitted. "Every day I'm terrified you'll realize this is too hard and leave. Every day I'm terrified you'll realize I'm too difficult and regret choosing me." They laughed together, recognizing the absurdity and truth in both fears. "We're a mess," Esther said. "Complete disaster," Taejin agreed. "But we're an honest disaster. That's worth something." "Worth everything," she corrected softly. And it was. Not because it was perfect or easy or anything like the mythology they'd carried for 10 years, but because it was real. Because they'd chosen each other with full knowledge of cost and complication. Because love didn't survive by waiting patiently or promising forever. It survived by showing up, choosing deliberately, staying when it got hard. Some loves don't survive because they wait. They survive because two people refuse to lie, to themselves or each other, about what love costs. Esther and Taejin didn't promise forever as children. They chose it as adults, without guarantees, without safety, and without pretending love was ever simple. And in the choosing, in the staying, in the honest navigation of disappointment and damage, they built something mythology never could have survived. Something real. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling us, would you choose love if it meant losing everything you worked for? Because the truth is, love doesn't win by being easy. It wins by being honest. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay when the fantasy shatters and build something real in the ruins.